The Budget Committee has been assigned responsibility by Council to serve as a steering committee for the operational reviews authorized by City Council. The first meeting is to introduce the operational reviews and provide opportunity for committee to ask questions of the engaged consultants conducting the reviews. For context, Council's resolution of September 11th stated the Council established a Budget Committee to assume governance role for the ongoing operational reviews, serving as the steering committee to ensure direct contact and reporting key deliverables from the engaged consulting firms and to manage the approved scopes of work. That was Council's wish to manage the scope of work and have a direct relationship with the consultants. And I'll remind members of Council that very early on in the term of this Council, one of the first motions that was passed, put forward by Councillor Harkirat Singh, was to do a value for money audit to really look at our operations and make sure we put a value on every taxpayer dollar. That motion of Harkirat Singh's was passed unanimously by City Council, and so this is this and other motions have flowed from that initial request. Looking at, we have all members of Council are present today except for Councillor Dillon and Willens. Our first item of the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Committee, there is a closed session item included in today's agenda, and the closed session agenda was distributed yesterday afternoon to committee. Staff have requested the opportunity for committee to move into closed session to receive and consider some information before committee hears from our consultants and public on the 7 service reviews. May I have a motion to approve the agenda? Oh, Councillor Fortini.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question before we start. I know this is the first budget committee meeting. Are we going to go through like last year, or are we going to do department by department when we start the budget?
So,
and see how the employees are going.
So this is not going over the city budget. It's going over the operational reviews that we're conducting.
So that's only for this part then?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I have I see Councillor Santos have a motion to approve the agenda, seconded by Councillor Paleshi. All those in favor? Motion carries. Do members have a declaration of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act for any matter to be considered on today's agenda? Seeing none, the clerk will so note. We have no items for the consent motion today. Before we hear the consultant presentations, committee will have to recess to go into closed session because it relates to labor relations, employee negotiations, a position, plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on behalf of the municipality or local board. May I have a motion to move into closed session to deal with our closed session business? Moved by Councillor Santos, seconded by Councillor Williams. All those in favor? Motion carries. And we're going to immediately into closed session. And for those here tonight, it's not going to be a long closed session, so we should be back shortly. Session. Is there anything we need to report from?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just that a matter was considered in closed session and no direction was given.
Okay. So on that note, we move on to 4.1, correct? We can now start receiving the consultant presentations. In the interest of time, to ensure we can hear from all the consultants, I suggest we hear from the 3 consultants first before asking questions for clarification. So we'll have the 3 presentations. They will be as concise and brief as possible so that we can have as much time for questions and answers. Our first presentation is item 4.1, a presentation from EY Advisory Services regarding the operational reviews for governance and internal services, public works engineering, fire emergency services, and Brampton Library. So for the consultant presentation from EY Advisory Services.
Good evening,
The floor is yours.
Council, Mayor. Nice to see you all again. I saw many of you were doing the regional review, so it's great to see you all again. My name is Mohammed Vamani. I'm an associate partner at Ernst & Young in our Government and Public Sector Advisory Services practice. And I'm going to be the overall lead of this engagement. This is my colleague, David Bryden. He's going to be he's a manager in our practice, and he's going to be our overall project manager for these reviews that we're going to do. I'm just going to give you this is our agenda. We are going to try and keep it brief. Just help you understand our team and how we're going to be approaching the work that we're doing. I'm talking about the scopes that we have, and there are 4 of them. So we'll try and keep it brief to allow for questions. We'll go through our proposed work plan and timeline, talk a little bit about the deliverables and the governance that we're going to be going through over the next couple of months, and then obviously open up for discussion towards the end. Just wanted to present, this is our project team. We've taken the approach of managing all 4 of these service reviews as one team to try and make it as efficient as possible, have similar analytics tools, templates, things like that. And so just in terms of the roles and responsibilities, I will be the engagement partner. That means I'm responsible for the overall engagement, quality oversight, so on. Like I said, David is our project manager. So he will oversee the day-to-day work and working with the project managers that have been assigned from the city. There are 3 components that are common to all of these studies, and that's elements and analytics around organizational design, alternate service delivery and service efficiency, and detailed financial analysis and modeling. And so we have a lead for each of those. And then there's a good cadre of support team there as well from different parts of our business, including our IT advisory practice, our modeling and economics, and our infrastructure practice as well. You will see we have WSP as well as an engineering firm. There are subcontractors for one of the areas of scope for public works and engineering. We also have a team of subject matter advisors to call upon when needed. Everybody on this list has been working almost exclusively in the municipal space over the last year, together doing engagements just like this. Most recently, as I said, the regional review at the Region Appeal. We've been doing work at the City of Toronto, the City of Vancouver, the City of St. Catharines. That's all happening concurrently. So we have a lot of experience. We've been doing this a long time, and we're going to bring the power of the firm to you to try and get this done over the next three months. Okay. I'm going to pass things over to David, our project manager. He's going to briefly give you some of the highlights of each one of the scopes and tell you about the timelines that we're dealing with.
Thanks, Mohammed. Thank you, Council and Mr. Mayor. So for governance and internal services, we're looking at 7 different pieces of the organization, starting with digital innovation and IT. So really here we're looking at the city's IT technology strategy, including its voice over internet protocol strategy, looking at the implementation plan that the city has developed, doing a strategic peer review and validating that approach, as well as looking at the overall organizational structure, the way that the DI and IT group is set up, and the resourcing complement associated with that. For enforcement and bylaw services, similarly, there's an organizational structure review, looking at an alternative service delivery approach specific to animal services, and looking at, as part of, in conjunction with the community services review, the licensing and permit application approach, the one-window approach. On finance, it's, again, org structure and process improvement opportunities specific to AP and AR, more process improvement opportunities more generally, as well as an alternative service delivery of payroll and an approach around that. Legal services, looking at process improvement and ASD, particularly as it comes to outsourced versus insourced service delivery. Clerk's office, again, process improvement and automation, looking at integration and where there may be overlaps with DI and IT or potential areas where there are handoffs in terms of roles and responsibilities that need to be managed, and potential revenue generation opportunities. Human resources, we're looking at 2 programs specifically, so the Disability Management Program and Talent Acquisition Program. Strategic communications, again, org structure, process improvement, including cross-departmental communications, and ASD for specific pieces of the organization as appropriate. I will say, underpinning this scope and all of the other scopes, we will be doing a jurisdictional analysis and benchmarking using comparable municipal jurisdictions. For Public Works and Engineering, there's a light-duty fleet review, which is focused not insignificantly around the greenhouse gas and emissions standards of vehicles, looking at the different types of vehicles and looking at potentially components that are related to green fleet. The winter maintenance program, so an analysis of the current service delivery model and potential considerations around alternative service delivery models, implications of changing the service level from 7.5 centimeters to 5 centimeters, alternative removal and mitigation methods, considerations around communications, and opportunities to cross-deploy resources more effectively with with parks maintenance and forestry. For parks maintenance and forestry, it's looking at 5 service areas: grass cutting, sports fields, naturalized spaces, or naturalized parks and open spaces, horticultural services, and forestry services, and again, opportunities to cross-deploy resources. And transportation services is looking at an organizational structure review and business process improvement opportunities. Fire and emergency services, it's assessing fiscal effectiveness, both looking at other fire jurisdictions, but also looking at potentially non-fire comparators that may provide interesting insights for how fire could be delivered more efficiently and effectively, including evaluating the priority dispatch model, an organizational review in terms of optimizing efficiency, looking at organizational spans and layers, roles and responsibilities for the emergency management office, looking at wellness services and how they're delivered to ensure the effectiveness and availability of firefighting staff, and an apparatus and maintenance efficiency review, in particular looking again at non-fire comparators to see if there are potential lessons that could be learned from other sectors. And finally, with Brampton Library, we are looking at an organizational structure review, looking at a fairly deep benchmarking analysis, so cost of service, facility makeup, facility models, types of programming, budget allocations, resourcing, cost per capita, and other leading practices, and process improvement opportunities across the library organization. Our methodology and approach is consistent across all of these service reviews. So we start with our project initiation meetings. We've completed all of those, the initial kickoff meetings. This is the final major element of the project initiation. Then we go into information gathering, where we're conducting current state interviews, understanding what works well in the current state, what the pain points are, honing in on those specific areas that we're looking to assess more deeply, understanding their fit into the organization, and reviewing considerable financial and non-financial data. We then complete our current state assessment and develop a current state assessment report. Alongside that, we'll be identifying future state opportunities for improvement, so both opportunities that are focused on the 2020 budget timeline and also those that have potentially longer timelines for both impact and implementation. And finally, we produce our interim and then final reports. There are 2 distinct timelines that have been developed because of the timelines around the Audit and Accountability Fund, although we understand that may have changed. So those timelines, we may work with your project managers as appropriate as those timelines may be updated. But for Public Works and Governance and Internal Services, we'll basically conduct the majority of the current state analysis and the benchmarking analysis through the month of October. That will lead to an initial report which will be submitted early in November, and that initial report will identify both the current state analysis, the jurisdictional analysis, and any 2020 opportunities, and bring those forward. A draft update report will be produced towards the end of November or early December, which will include more fulsome identification of both 2020 opportunities and longer-term opportunities, including implementation considerations, costs of implementation as they are applicable, more detailed benefits, and then we'll refine that into the final report and implementation plan. Brampton Library and Fire and Emergency Services are on a slightly more accelerated timeline. So that first current state and 2020 opportunities report is the middle of October. The draft report is the middle of November, and the final report is the end of November, in order to be posted publicly alongside the audit and accountability timelines. And the deliverable slide just highlights the deliverables that I'd identified and the dates associated with them.
Project governance, you can stay here. Project governance is clear. I think it's going to be clear for all the service reviews. You are obviously the steering committee right here, and so we're kicking things off, and so I'm sure there'll be the appropriate touch points with this committee to be able to steer that. Pardon the pun. There's obviously project sponsors that are our service area commissioners. We've had a chance to meet with everybody, and we'll continue to, and we will all be keeping in close contact with our commissioners and working with them throughout. And then on a project management basis, each service area has an assigned project manager who, again, we've already started working closely with David and the rest of our team to manage the project schedule, manage, mitigate risk, and ensure that everything happens on time, because we know that's a really important component to this. And that's all we really have. Quick overview. There's a lot to do. And when the other presentations are done, we'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is item 4.2, a presentation from Blackline Consulting regarding the operational reviews for community services. Oh, we're doing, Councilor saying questions at the end. Okay.
Good
Yes.
evening, Council. Ian Shelley, I'm partner of Blackline and will be responsible for our service delivery review of community services. I've got a short presentation tonight, which I'll run through quickly to give you an opportunity to get the final presentation and questions. Our scope of work is community services, but it's 4 of the 6 sections of community services. We'll be looking at recreation, we'll be looking at Service Brampton, we'll be looking at facilities, maintenance, operation, and we'll be looking at animal services. We will be grouping them into 2 groups, so I've specifically highlighted that recreation and Service Brampton will be one of our work streams, and facilities, maintenance, and animal services will be our other work stream. And you'll see later in the presentation the teams we put together to run through that review. Our approach, and I think you're going to see similarities between all the approaches that are presented tonight. Our first phase, the kickoff, we're in the middle of. During that phase, we'll be doing all our preliminary data gathering. And there's a real touch point at the end of this session for us, which is around establishing the areas of focus. Within the RFP that we responded to, there was a number of areas of focus presented. We're using our first phase to do a broad scan of each of these departments and consider where we're most likely to identify the best opportunities for service improvements or service efficiencies. And so the end of our first phase is a touch point with our sponsor to discuss which areas of focus we've identified and whether they align with the city's view of where we should focus going forward. Stage 2 we refer to as opportunity identification. Opportunities to us are all of the concepts that we can move forward on improving service efficiency or increasing service levels if that's deemed appropriate. So in that phase we'll be going out doing a benchmarking analysis using the data that's available in the city to understand how do you quantify your performance on service delivery. We'll be looking at other municipalities both within the province and outside of the province for their practices and lessons they can bring to bear potentially on the city and how you deliver the service in the areas that we're going to cover. We'll be looking at service levels and quantifying the service performance. We'll be meeting with staff. We like to do what we refer to as shadowing, which is to get out into the divisions and sit with staff for an hour, 2 hours and see how the work is done, what are the difficulties they face. So those practical shadowing sessions we're actually going to start ahead of even the focus groups, and we'll be involved in those next week. Out of that second session, we'll have a number of opportunities that we'll work with the sponsor to prioritise and decide which are the opportunities that are most likely to yield benefit, and we'll move into effectively our final phases of developing fulsome descriptions of how you can take advantage of those opportunities, before finally producing the report and executive briefings at the end that we'll come back to you with. At the moment, we haven't discussed with the sponsor exactly what the touch points through this committee will be, but we're fundamentally expecting there's multiple touch points for your input through this whole process. Within the RFP that was presented, there was a number of types of opportunities that we were asked to consider, types of opportunities, ways you could change your service delivery, whether it's, and I've listed there the types of opportunities. I want to highlight 2 additional ones which we've already mentioned to our sponsor and project management team that we would bring in, which I think are important to be highlighted. We do consider, in addition to things such as efficiency, how we affect workload. And that's not an efficiency, that's looking about how we change how we do things so that the workload itself is fundamentally changed. And we think that is a rich vein to go looking at. is not just being more efficient, not just doing the work we have more quickly and more effectively, but actually looking at whether we have to do this work at all. So we'll bring that in as one of the lenses that we take. The second lens that I'm going to mention, and maybe this is a council who would be very familiar with this, is collaboration. There's the concept of shared service within here, which is working across departments within the municipality. We also look beyond the boundaries of just a municipality, whether it's partnering with neighbouring municipalities or whether it's partnering with the region to do service delivery. We've very recently been working with Milton, where the region's downloaded roads to the local municipality. And it's really a play at scale. If you're not big enough to do something efficiently, can you work with somebody else to get scale? So we're adding those two, if you like, lenses to what we'll be looking at in terms of our opportunities. The team we brought, and that hasn't displayed particularly well, but we've got two work streams, as I've mentioned. John Nasser, the other partner in Blackline, will lead the Recreation Service Brampton work stream. Myself will be looking at animal services and facilities. We'll be supported by one of our consultants each, and we've got a shared research consultant that we'll be using. Our research consultant will spend most of the time around the benchmarking analysis and the data gathering and identifying service levels. Timeline looks very similar to everyone else's timeline. We presented with a fairly aggressive approach to November, which we'll push towards. As I mentioned, our first point is finding those focus areas. We'll move through September and October with that analysis of where you stand today compared to your peers. And the bulk of our work for October and much of November is really elaborating those changes that you could make to service delivery. And I'll step down to allow the final consultants to present. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item 4.3, our next presentation is Optimus SBR regarding the operational reviews for economic development and culture and Brampton Transit.
Good evening. I'm going to introduce the service efficiency study on economic development and culture, and my colleague Arminda is going to introduce the work that we will be doing on transit. You may not have heard of Optimus SBR. We are an independently owned management consulting firm that offers a full range of services across North America in a number of practice areas, including government and healthcare. So the first project that I want to talk about is the Economic Development and Culture Project. In terms of the agenda or the contents, the project team, mission and success, the work streams and our study focus our approach and timelines. So in terms of our team, I will be the executive oversight for this project, and Vivian Tan will be our project manager. We have Bill Allen, who is our subject matter expert on culture and festivals and events, and Bill is here tonight as well. Rohit Hora will be one of our consultants, and an additional consultant who is not here tonight is Michael Bugea. For the transit team, Arminda Dupieras will be the executive oversight, and tonight with her is Matt Latava, who is our transit expert. So when we start a project, the first thing we want to do is think about what the project mission is, but also to be sure that we understand what will be success at the end of the project. So for this project, for Economic Development and the Culture Department, the mission is to look for opportunities for efficiency and savings in short-term and long-term in three identified areas: the Economic Development and Culture Department as a whole, the Performing Arts section, and Festival and Special Events section. But probably more important is to just pause for a minute and think about what will be success at the end of the project. We'll want to be working with you to identify changes to work methods, processes, responsibilities that will result in cost savings and improvement in service delivery in both the short and the long term. We're looking for alignment within and across departments from a structural and service delivery perspective, and interdependencies with other departments where that will also help with efficiencies. We'll be looking for cost-effective program delivery applications, clear understanding of cost requirements and savings resulting from the recommended change, implementation guidelines, and importantly, through working with you, buy-in from all the key partners and stakeholders. In terms of the areas of review, as I mentioned, it's divided into 3 areas. Economic Development and Culture Department will be looking at process improvement, benchmarking, and jurisdictional scan. For Performing Arts section in the Culture Services Division, organizational structure, alternate service delivery options, process improvement, and benchmarking. And for festivals and special events, a focus on benchmarking and, again, possible alternate service delivery. The project approach that we'll be using will have 6 steps. The project launch and discovery is almost finished, and we are working now on developing the evaluation framework and the study focus confirmation. We'll have 2 deliverables out of the second phase, which will be the evaluation framework and confirmed study focus areas and the methodology that we'll be using. Then we'll move into the current state assessment and complete a document review, stakeholder engagement, jurisdictional research, and an environmental scan. We'll make an assessment and deliver a current state report, which will include issues and gaps, as well as preliminary identification of opportunities. Recommendation development analysis will look at what we've learned and prepare a draft report for review, and then come back with a final report. The project will end, of course, with a project closeout process to make sure that knowledge is transferred from us to the city. And our timelines, like my previous, the previous presentations, are very tight. We will be moving very quickly into the current state assessment, having almost finished the first 2 phases. And recommendation development in early November, and working on the report and documentation from about the end of October into November, with the final report on the 18th of November.
Right. And in terms of transit, in terms of the project team, we have 4 individual studies for transit. Myself, Arminda, I'm the overall executive oversight, making sure we have integration. I'm a principal at Optimus as part of our public sector group, and also the lead of our transit practice. So for each of our studies, given the timelines, we have dedicated project managers, we have subject matter experts and consultants to support them all. In terms of project mission and success, Mary covered most of this. You'll see a lot of the similarities, which ultimately, in terms of the 4 identified focus areas, we're looking at cost savings opportunities, improvements, again with the alignment across other departments as well. In terms of areas of review under each of the studies, for on-demand transit, we're looking at, we're analyzing the current service delivery model. We're looking at opportunities for lower cost options, and of course conditions for successful implementation, such as complementing existing transit routes. For study number 2, the bus life cycle analysis, the focus area is really the optimum bus retention years by fleet type and optimum maintenance programs. For study number 3, the snow removal for transit facilities, we're looking at service level requirements, and we're looking at costs and overall efficiency of the service model. And finally, for study number 4, for service reliability, we're looking at analyzing the costs of the long-term absenteeism and assessing potential cost savings. So it's really a cost assessment and model approach. For the project approach, we have, very similar to our colleagues, in terms of kickoff meeting and planning, all of our kickoff meetings are planned for next week. So we've been in the planning phase this week, and we'll be collecting the data, doing the analysis. We have very study-specific steps, since each of these studies have their own unique needs, and then ultimately providing the final report. You can see some of the deliverables for each of the studies underneath. Timelines. So again, we do have some different timelines for each of these studies, but the main takeaway is it's some real concerted effort in a short period of time, and everything will be drafted by the end of November and finalized in December. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now take questions from members of council about the 3 consulting firms. May I take the motion to receive the reports, or do the questions first? Councillor Vicente is first up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question for all three presentations were very informative, but since I thought of this when I was listening to the EY Advisory Services, if perhaps they could answer. In my previous line of work, I had the opportunity to speak and work with advisors to large corporations, and often consulting services were brought on to provide advice and to provide strategic advice to help that organization improve its service. And so Councillor Santos and I, when we first were elected, we decided to embark on a tour of all the various departments of the city so that we could better understand ourselves, the nature of the departments, the people that work there, the work that they provide. And so my question is this: if you're an outside consulting firm and you're looking at the operations that are as complex as a city like the city of Brampton, how do you go about making an analysis to accurately find where efficiencies are located and perhaps where there's waste, and how to improve processes? How do you do that in a 5-6 month period?
So thanks for the question. Typically, there's a couple of ways that we would do that. One of the major ways is to look at the way your other area municipalities actually deliver their services and try and do some of that benchmarking. It is going through and doing some detailed financial modeling to understand what's there and what's not, and really using the power of the staff that have been delivering these programs for a long time, and they understand the historical context of what's there and what's not. So it's a combination of all that we try and use. You triangulate your data and you try and develop some ideas as to what the right things to do are and what are not the right things to do.
So as you begin to do a deep dive into, say, for example, our works department, and look at how they manage their snow and winter maintenance, how many people would you send into that arena to try to figure out where the opportunities lie?
Do you mean what's the size of the team that we're going to be deploying on that? Over a course of 2 to 3 months, maybe 3 people, are there full time. It's a complex service. There's a lot of parts to it. So it's looking at all the different levels of data that are available to us and trying to do a round of consultations internally with staff to try and understand what's been done before, what's happening right now, what our strategies are, and trying to understand where the opportunities are between that. So there's people working directly with your staff, there's individuals doing that benchmarking in the background, and there's also the experience that we've had working with other municipalities as well.
So you're saying that between the consultative process and comparing with other municipalities, that's how you come about providing your advice to the city of Brampton? And
looking at data, financial information, previous reports, any other documentation that you might have, yes.
Okay, because I think that's important for everyone to understand, including members of the public, because this council is looking to find efficiencies and to provide value for taxpayers.
Sure.
Another question I had came from just watching your presentation for your review of our HR department. Actually, all the departments you were looking at process improvement opportunities, but for the HR department, that was not included. Why is that?
I wouldn't have the answer for that. You'd probably have to ask staff. That scope that we have in front of you is the scope that we were asked to respond to.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
I do believe there is another study going on concurrently with another firm that is looking at some of the more detailed areas. That's why it's been excluded from our scope. I believe that's the reason.
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. That's important for us to also know. And thank you to everyone who presented. Everything was very informative. Look forward to your advice.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Vicente. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you very much through you, Mr. Chair. I thought Councillor Vicente was going to go right into my question with his last question. Okay, thank you. Often when we have consultants, I use the term consultants, their view based on 5 months or 6 months of looking at the interactions of what goes on in the city can be quite different from the public's perception of reality. And if it's their perception, it's our reality, because when they perceive something's not being done, we're the ones who hear about it. So I'm just wondering, how are you going to include information such as the number of 311 complaints, complaints that come into councillors? Is there going to be any public outreach at all to determine what our levels should be or what the levels could be? And I'm asking that in terms of, maybe the consultant's report comes back or the audit comes back and we can find efficiencies somewhere, but those efficiencies actually cause more problems for the councillors in terms of what's going on the street. So how are you going to make sure that everything is coherent and everything works together in these reports?
Through the chair, if I can.
Good evening. Through the chair, to that question, what we're looking at is having the risk analysis. So when we're looking at different changes, there's also going to be a risk analysis provided by the consultants to address those issues. So when you look at service degradation, how does that affect the end user? Those are the pieces that are also going to be in all of those reports, and we've requested that for each one of those.
Okay. Suppose there is no service degradation, but the current level is viewed by the public as below what standard they expect.
And through the chair, that's part of that piece. So it's not just service degradation, but overall customer satisfaction has to be considered. And in considering that, we also want they'll do somewhat of a SWOT analysis to see what the threats and concerns are, so that we can have a good understanding of how that's going to affect the perception of residents. As well, we have our customer satisfaction survey that also will be a correlation to be able to see what the impact is as well.
Oh, okay, because I didn't see.
That's not theirs. That's
a customer satisfaction survey.
That's something that's already happening. So that also gives us some information and data.
Okay, and will you be looking at 311 complaints?
That is through the chair. That is actually part of one of the studies. So that is 311 is actually listed in there.
Okay, thank you. My next question is. We recently established a special second unit task force, which is cross-departmental. There is no history. There is no trends. All we have is 6 months worth of work. Well, actually 5 months worth of work to go by. How do we ensure that the success that we're having with that cross-departmental team, including fire, how do we make sure that that is all considered as we look forward to the processes? Because this may not be a set process that we've undertaken over the past 2 or 3 years. This is something brand new. This is something that's going to need more people. This is something, we just had a presentation on it, that we have no history on. So how do we account for things like that in this review that we're doing?
If I may, through the chair, excellent question, Councillor Bowman. And given the fact how new and successful that task force has been to date, it is new, and we still want to continue to look at how successful it's going to be and how it operates over another period of time. That way we've got more substantive information to actually establish trends and then do a proper program evaluation of that specific unit to see whether it should continue, whether it needs to be transformed into something else. But that isn't necessarily part of the specific scope that we're looking at for enforcement and bylaw services. However, with the continued spirit and intent, there are a number of different touch points across a number of these different statements of work that the consultants are all connecting on. So for instance, animal services is the scope within that black line's looking at, but it's also an area that we're considering as part of, is there a strong connection for efficiencies and collaboration with enforcement? And if so, Ernst & Young is going to be touching base with them to say, we have a success with
one area on the illegal second units. Is there opportunities here? Could something work? Is there a recommendation for a pilot or something else for the steering committee to consider?
Okay, and thanks, Joe. That was basically what I was getting at, because I believe one group is looking at fire and another group is looking at your services. So I want to make sure that those two mesh, and you know, we don't want to look at fire, who has a tremendous amount of extra responsibility with the second unit task force, as does bylaw, and have bylaw, for instance, grow their department, while fire takes on other responsibilities, and that gets sort of left off the other end, because I want to make sure this team works together so that everything's considered.
Through the chair, it's been stated and very explicit with all the kickoffs with the three consulting firms that there are specific touch points where they need to have that cross collaboration.
Okay. Last question. We have just implemented a Parks and Rec master plan, a transportation master plan, an active transportation master plan, and a green plan, green energy plan. So arts and culture as well. How are all those going to be looked at as we move forward to ensure that what we planned and what we promised in those plans are met in future years under this review?
Through the chair, when we're doing all of these assessments and going through that cross-functional analysis, each one of the project managers is responsible for ensuring the details that they're required to be able to have a comprehensive analysis of the different service areas, are able to access that information. So when there are master plans available, they will be made available to consultants so that they ensure that they're being able to have a full scope view of what's involved in that group and how it's going to be impacted. Again, going back to that service experience for the end user, we want to ensure that understanding the master plans will also inform that piece.
Okay, and in particular, I'll just use Alex as an example. I mean, electric, the transformation to electric buses and things of that nature. That's going to have a tremendous impact over the next 5 to 10 years on the city. So I just want to make sure that we're looking at things like that when we do the review. And there's things like that in every single department. Amps, car cameras, they're everywhere. So as one of the other councillors said, this is a huge undertaking for 5 months, 6 months. So I'm very interested to see what comes back. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. I guess I don't know where to start, but just based on some of the comments from my colleagues, but one thing that I talk about a lot, and it sort of hits me, when you look at sort of the quality of the service and the cost of the service. So, there's always that tacit understanding that if you contract out, it'll be cheaper and you'll find efficiencies. But when you've actually looked at a lot of the services that you contract out, a lot of municipalities are actually bringing it back in because you get the quality of the service. And not to get into specific service, but, in previous life and having been part of these exercises, so I hope that we're going to be looking at the quality of the service. The second comment I would make is understanding the context of the city in which we live in. So it's great we have consultants looking at best practices, but I would put forth, our diversity, strong South Asian population, many councillors here, very sports orientated. We love sports in Brampton, so we're not going to be cutting sports fields. So that's just almost like off the table. It's those type of things, having that environmental scan, understanding personalities, understanding the city in which we live in, that there are things that just don't bother looking at, or there's things that we can look at to improve, So I just find that, with tongue in cheek, is that to come and give us, identify efficiencies on efficiencies that, I would sort of question the type of efficiency because the context is very different. And again, our bottom line is financial, but also our bottom line is what's best for our community and best for our residents. With that said, I think, we should look at assets. And what do I mean by that? So we own, for example, stages. But yet we contract out because as moving a stage to a park to do Canada celebrations, you need insurance, you need to hire staff, da. But we own stuff. So are we going to be looking at all the assets that we have? Should we own this asset? Should we own this, thing? Does it make sense to own this thing? So I think that has to be, the tangibles. I think we have to look at that as well. I look forward to, the learnings. I think we're always trying to find the best sort of cost-effective manner. I look forward to our engagement. I think the community part in terms of, when I read this, all of us probably understand this. Probably some of us, are challenged. But when you communicate this to the public, similar to how we say, legalese, simplify it. I think there has to be that sort of simplification throughout this whole process. So if consultants can be as simplified, understanding, technical knowledge, but the way we communicate, this is great, I guess, to us, but again, the audience and people out there, what does this mean? So I think there has to be that. The last thing I would say, what is not here? There's no review of council. So why is that important? And this is why I say this respectfully. We go off on a lot of business lines. We bought, and I've said that many times, we make you guys go to areas which are not reflected in these charts. So I don't see, I could give you 3 or 4 subjects that we've been dealing with that don't fall under any department here that you'll be looking at. So when you go run off like mice, chasing around going, geez, we have this direction, we have to go do this. And then after we go to you, well, but you didn't take care of our core service. How do you review that? How does a consultant go off and say, well, we can improve efficiency in this area, but our staff, are dealing with all these. So I know you can't review us, and I guess the public does, but I think there has to be that discipline, that consciousness, that when we go off and give direction to go do stuff that's not within these pages, we're taking away efficiencies and we're taking away the quality of the service and the work that we're doing. So I would say that should transcend itself into part of this process is us also developing that discipline in council, respectfully. Thank you.
Councillor Leshy.
I don't want to go now. I think Councillor Madero's kind of touched on everything. I guess I feel a little bit confused up here, and some of my questions, I'm just curious. For one, is staff hearing this for the first time? Are they seeing this for the first time? We're seeing this for the first time, so is staff seeing this for the first time?
Through the chair, staff have been aware of this process, much like council has. An email went out a week or so ago to staff, letting them know that we're moving into phase 2 of the core service review and the deeper dives and the operational assessments, and that the consultants will be around and that they may have to participate in engagement activities and work with them to provide information. So they're aware of it. In terms of seeing this documentation being presented tonight, this would likely be the first time staff would have seen it.
And the work plan schedules? Same?
Same, correct.
Okay. So I guess what is this work plan going to do in terms of our budget timelines? And we strive to, once we're out of an election year, to get our budget submitted in time so we get that great award by whomever it is, I don't remember, because we get so many awards for the great work we do.
Through the chair, the staff have been engaged and understand that this process would be taking place, that it would feed into our budget process. The consultants have been told, and very clearly, that's why hence the timelines, and they talked about aggressive timelines and ambitious things. But the expectation is this is to feed into our current budget timelines, because what's very clear coming early on from the core service review and the value for money is to understand where are those specific areas that we can leverage to find efficiencies and savings to facilitate and support council in delivering a successful budget that respects the taxpayer as best we can. Clearly, there are going to be some other examples coming out of this review that are great ideas, but we may not see the value or savings or cost avoidance until the next budget, but we're trying to get the key recommendations for lack of a better term, low-hanging fruit, or key ones that can specifically be implemented in the 2020 budget. So that's why those are coming earlier on as possible, so that this committee can review and support them, and if so, we'll feed them into our budget process and timelines as currently posted.
Because council has not had the budget calendar put before them as of yet, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the budget calendar is already in place and should be in members' calendars for starting November 25th. I believe there are meetings scheduled.
So I see a whole lot of tentative meetings.
Yes.
Tentative to me isn't, we've said that these are gonna be the days. I guess at the region, we say, these are gonna be the days. At the city, do you say these are gonna be the days?
Through you,
Either way, I'm
Mr.
okay
Mayor,
with
that advice comes through SLT and the treasurer in consultation with the budget committee, but those are tentative days that are set aside.
Absolutely, okay. So I guess too, and we've kind of gone around it a little bit, and I'd like to better understand, and we don't really get too much into operational. We try not to get too much into operational, but I'd really like to understand, how is the consultant that's going to be walking into Fire and Emergency Services going to sit down and have those discussions with whomever, Bill, I'm assuming Kim is going to be leading this because she's here.
Through the chair, and George, our division chief of administration.
And George. And I'm sure Kim and George are extremely busy now. So walk me through this. How is this going to work? When are they coming in every Tuesdays to sit down and have a chat? Is it correspondence? What kind of timelines are we talking about here?
Through the chair, so we have the timeline identified in the project deliverables, and we're making it a priority as our department to make sure we work with the consultant to meet those deadlines.
And what do you see on their day-to-day jobs? Where do you see that work going? And what do you see that something's got to fall off the pace here? So what is that? Who's going to decide?
I think through the chair, we know it's a priority, and we're just going to make it happen and get it done.
And I believe that you can do that, Bill. Chief, sorry. But I think that's hard in other areas. I don't know how recreation is going to, but we've talked about this before. This is going to be extremely difficult. And if, let's say all consultants are coming in on, Tuesdays and Thursdays or whatever it is, what's the collaboration then look like between cross departments that, need to be able to collaborate on issues that we're currently handling?
Through the chair, what we've done, we have a cross-functional team of project managers, and what we're trying to do is find efficiencies and requests from the consultants. So where there are commonalities in what the consultants request, we will work with the subject matter experts to get the information for all of the consultants simultaneously versus going to them piecemeal to provide efficiencies. Additionally, the project managers will share information and cross-pollinate as well to ensure that they're also communicating with one another where they can find information that can be provided to the consultants to provide that efficiency as well. Recognizing that everyone has heavy loads, we've tried to also work with some of the key areas like HR that would provide org charts to identify a key point person to also find some efficiencies and help to expedite the process.
Okay. To the consultants, have you worked together before in a capacity like this for a municipality? Is, I guess, one of my questions.
Through the chair. Myself and Mohammed know each other quite well and formally work together on a number of engagements. I have no concern about the collaboration that we'll have working together. We've already established with our project manager within the next week we'll have our first consultation with EY. So from Blackline's perspective, we can say confident we don't have a concern about working with the other consulting firm.
So have you three of you gotten into a room and kind of had a good discussion about how you're going to turn this out? And
Through the project manager that I'm working with, I believe that's being scheduled at the moment to have that initial meeting. We focused on kicking off with the city as the first event to get that work moving, and then I believe within the next week that meeting is being established by the city project managers.
okay. Councillor Santos would like examples of other municipalities. Have you worked with other municipalities in their budget process? Yes.
Sorry. For Ernst & Young, absolutely. We've recently helped the City of Toronto redesign their budgeting process. We've been doing this exact same exercise over the last few months with the City of Toronto as well. We're doing something at a much higher level for the City of Vancouver, and for the Audit and Accountability Fund, we are working with the City of St. Catharines right now. So very similar exercises, finding similar use cases in different places that we can bring to this as well, yes.
And touching on core, like the core services?
Yes.
Yes, okay. You're welcome. Thank you, Mr.
Through the
Chair.
chair, may I just respond as well on the budget?
Please.
We've just finished that with Milton, and we're doing that with Caledon at the moment.
You did say Milton.
The two things I want to raise is that what we try and do is yield the opportunities as early as we can. Our timeline intersects directly with the beginning of your budget, and if we produce our report at the last minute and say, there you go, that's the opportunities, there's no preparation time for staff. So we work very much open book, saying, this is emerging, consider it as you build the budget to try and help dovetail with your budget process.
Mm-hmm.
So we have worked with a number of municipalities on a variety of organizational reviews and efficiency reviews, not specifically within the budget process, but within having experience looking at how they can be organized more effectively and so on, process reviews, those kinds of things. And we are also currently working with another municipality in their budget process with the same kind of review.
And is that other municipality with other consultants?
Sorry?
Is the other municipality with multiple consultants?
No, it's
No.
one that we're working with them as one company across several departments.
And I don't know if I don't think I have an issue with it. I'm just kind of asking to
Yeah,
get more
well, you know what, we're really collaborative people, so.
I'm sure you are
so
very professional.
If
and-
we need to collaborate as consultants, you will. I think you will have seen that our approach to these projects are remarkably similar, and that we use similar processes, so it will help us, that will help us to all work together in the same direction.
And I'm sure, and I guess just my biggest concern is, us at the city, I think it's safe to say that we think and we want the city to run, as efficient as possible and as lean as possible. So I have concerns with, the amount of work that this is going to bring, and I don't know if we're going to get the budget out in that time to get that old fancy star, I think it is. Come on, tell me what it is.
GFOA.
Sorry?
GFOA.
Yeah, GFOA. So, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, and through you, Mayor. I have more of a question about the process. Was there an RFP for every department, or how did this come about?
So through the chair, following council direction, after KPMG's presentation of phase one, we issued a request for qualifications that went out, and we received a number of submissions, which several firms were pre-qualified. Of those pre-qualified firms across the 7 areas that we were looking at considering, they could apply to as many so long as they met the criteria. If they met the criteria, then they were asked to bid on the statements of work, and then we evaluate those statements of work, those submissions, and these are the resulting successful candidates from that.
Yeah, okay, because I'm trying to figure out how, I guess I was surprised to see 3 different firms, right? So I guess each department, I guess we were focusing, like I would assume it would be a contract for the whole project, but I guess it was divided up, or?
Through the chair, as many of you have articulated through many of your questions and comments, this is a pretty intense schedule, and recognizing the level of work and recognizing that there are some firms that are much more specialized in certain areas of business and specialists. The best scenario, and given the fact that you saw 3 different firms and they all had the similar approach, this is something that we could bring a number of different firms in to ensure we met these timelines presented to us to deliver back to council on its direction to staff.
Okay. And I guess my other comment would be regarding benchmarking. You know, it's a great approach, and I want to hit the marks, but I hope we're also striving for the stars of trying to be leaders in certain things, because at the end of the day, that's also our competitive advantage. That's also part of our brand. And so just to keep that in mind as we're conducting these reviews, you know, it'll be good to be in the average, but it'll always be something that council is interested in, of what it takes to become exceptional. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Singh. Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a question about the costs. And so, from what I understand, just kind of do some research on the fly as well. So, 39 municipalities and 3 school boards were eligible for the Audit and Accountability Fund. Is that correct? Do we know how much we are eligible for and what the cost will be?
Through the chair, that fund we can access is up to $250,000.
That we're eligible for. But
Correct.
what is the total cost?
For this process?
Yeah.
It's the initial upset limit that we had earmarked was around $600,000. It may be a little higher than that. We haven't finalized all the purchase orders, and depending on if there was going to be any changes of scope from the steering committee, but in and around that ballpark, but it may be a little higher.
So is it $250,000 guaranteed that we're able to access?
Through the chair, we've been pre-approved as one of the qualified municipalities to apply for that fund of $250,000. And in meeting those timelines, we need to submit our final reports to the province and post them online. They've actually extended those deadlines as of today. The draft report needs to be submitted to the province by the end of November. Final report posted on our website by December 31st. We're still going to keep the timelines that are in these presentations because, to Councillor Peleshi's point, we want to ensure that we meet the timelines as per our budget and that we meet our GFOA requirements. So that is the intention, but once we submit, then the government would send us the $250,000.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Councillor Singh, you had another question?
Yeah, I was juggling with something in my head, and I think I might have a way forward to look at it, because I'm inspired by some of the councillors' comments about staying within our mandate and core business. I guess this is for E&Y, because I see the city clerk's office as something we're going to be auditing. Not to pick on you, Peter, but I just want to say, could we also look at a referred matters list and maybe get an opinion of what falls within our mandate and what does not? And it'll be nice to have a third-party view on that. So seeing that councillors were interested in that approach, and that might be something just to get a third-party eye on and just get an opinion. I'm not saying we'll take anything off, but just to see what falls within our business, what doesn't, and maybe some opinions on that, and then council can make its decision.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the clerk's office is meeting with EY Advisory Services next Thursday, so I will bring that up.
Okay, seeing that we've exhausted the questions, I have a few myself. First to EY Canada. I noticed, and if you want to come up, that'd be great. In IT, you said you were going to look at a few things. Will you be looking at the staffing levels in Brampton compared to other municipalities?
That's correct.
Okay, and so we'll get that feedback in your report?
Correct.
You also mentioned VoIP, so the voice over IP technology. Are you looking at the equipment we have and if it's the most efficient use of our dollars?
There were one of the through the chair, one of the recommendations from the KPMG report was to look at VoIP technology, and so we are following through on that recommendation. I don't know if the actual technology itself was part of it. I think it was more on the business case around doing it. Is that correct?
We had a discussion today, and on that, it's about looking at the approach to continuing with the current technology platform, or looking at whether or not a different approach should be taken, so the business case around that.
Okay, and when you look at IT, are you looking at the tendering process as well in terms of are we getting the best, are we having enough competitive tenders?
When we look at conducting a financial efficiency analysis and opportunity analysis, we are considering different elements of that, which could include tendering.
Okay, so to ensure we're always having the most competition possible.
Okay. It could include whether it's competition or value for money.
Okay, thank you. In terms of HR, I noticed that description, there's only 2 bullet points there, which looked like it was a bit of a smaller scope. Was there a reason for that?
Yeah, through the chair, that was a scope that we were asked to focus on, and as we mentioned earlier, there is a current study similar to this being done by another consulting firm that's outside of this process.
So who asked you to look at just that area?
That was in the scope of work, the RFP that we responded to.
Okay.
So it would have been staff.
So the RFP specified a more limited
Correct.
scope. Okay. Traditionally, would you look at a broader area for HR?
Honestly, it all depends on what a client's looking to focus on. Okay. So often when you're looking at an HR department, yes, you might be doing that. But like I said, it sounds like that's already happening within the city in another initiative.
So maybe we can have that as attached to your report, just to make sure that you feel confident that work covered extensively enough the value for money audit of HR. And I know I'd like to see, in terms of staffing levels, once again, just like with IT, how it compares to other municipalities.
Sure. So through the chair, to the extent possible, we'll work with the project manager for our governance and internal services and the HR team, assuming that the timelines work out and we can exchange information. Absolutely, we would try and
what do you mean by
incorporate that.
project manager?
The project manager that we are dealing with for the governance and internal services service efficiency review. From the city of Brampton, I mean.
Through the chair, if I can assist in clarifying your question, Mayor. So the scope that the other firm is looking at for HR does include looking at FTE counts and comparative analysis, what services should be delivered, how do they compare to other jurisdictions, and that information will be provided to council, the steering committee, and you can have access to it, and we'll ensure that they connect with Ernst & Young. So it'll be a full transparent process for both positions. As you heard Karen speak to earlier, our Director of Strategic Development, we've assigned project managers for the city to work with the different lines of business to also collaborate and ensure information is being given to our consulting firms, as well as assisting and facilitating meetings taking place and booking of those meetings, and making sure, given the tight timelines, that our staff are doing whatever it takes to make sure these timelines are met and that the consultants are on track as well.
Okay. To the project manager for each area, do we have our own audit helping with that scope too? Like, is Feruzin involved at all in this project management?
So through the chair, what the project managers we've identified are city staff that typically either manage projects or have skill sets to manage projects. And again, they're just facilitating the success of moving this project forward given the tight timelines. Audit is not involved. Internal audit is not being involved in those aspects that you've questioned.
Okay. I think it'd probably be valuable to have internal audit involved as well, just to make sure that we're getting the full scope of what was what council was interested in. Do you want to, on that point? Okay. Councilor Flushy? I'll pause.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I realize you have other questions, but I don't want to get off of this. So I see that we have project managers from each different department and what's going on, but I would really feel a little bit, I think, more comfortable if we had our internal auditor kind of at the head of everything with in terms of the filtering. It would, for one, she's extremely capable of handling something like this, and I think that it would make me feel a lot more comfortable. So I feel like I'm prepared to put that into a recommendation in the form of a motion. I think from, looking at the chair of audit, I feel that's you, Mark. And around the table, I think it would give us a lot more satisfaction if that was happening. Satisfaction wasn't the right word.
Okay.
Confidence.
Thank you, Councillor Paleshi. Also, into the three consultants, does your scope including looking, I know we looked at some of the vehicles, but in terms of ownership versus leasing, for some of the, I know we looked at that with policing. Is that part of any of the scopes to look at some of the lifespans of our vehicles?
So our scope includes for public works, looking at the light duty fleet, and for fire and emergency services, a little bit around the apparatus and maintenance. But it wouldn't include. It would include light duty fleet vehicles for the specific scope. So it may not include the entire fleet.
Would there be any other aspects of the fleet that you would normally have an interest in, or value for money audit, and looking at those questions would make sense?
I think that's a decision that staff would have to make in consultation with you.
Well, the reason council said that we wanted to be the ones managing the operational review and the value for money is to make sure that it was extensive, and you are experts in this field, and that's one of the reasons I'm asking you that question. Would that be something that you'd look at normally when you've done work for businesses or governments? I want to know, and to the three consultants, would there be areas that you'd normally look at that's currently not in your scope?
So, as a broad answer, sure. There's lots of things across the organization that could be looked at that aren't necessarily in the scope. But for us as consultants, we were, given a request to do a certain, number of services and to review a certain number of things, and that's what we have responded to. To speak particularly about fleet, I'm going to be honest with you, EY is not experts in fleet, which is why we have a subcontractor from WSP that will be doing the fleet component of it, and I apologize they're not here. So we can talk more about, we can circle back to you on those specific components.
Was there anything else that you'd say would be a significant omission that's not being looked at in the current scope? Because council has the mandate to expand the scope or change the scope if we deem it appropriate. And so to the three consultants, what I'd like to know is there something that you would normally do in your line of work? Is there something that you think would have value to look at?
That's a good question.
And if you don't want to answer that tonight, you can let us know at a later point. But I just want to, I want that something for you to put a lot of thought into.
Sure. There have been questions around procurement and around HR. And when you're looking at corporate services, those are typically looked at. But as I think we said before, there are other initiatives that are happening along those, so they are being reviewed by staff already. The other one that was an interesting one was the asset question, as to whether there is a review of assets. Now, there are certain assets in some of the scopes, at least that we are focusing in on, that would be considered. However, the focus of this is service efficiency, not necessarily asset, efficiency. So I can see why it's not necessarily here.
Well, so and you say that, but you say that it's already being reviewed by staff. One of the reasons that Councillor Singh originally put this motion forward was to say it's always good to get a different perspective and a fresh set of eyes. You know, we love our staff at City Hall. They work very hard and they serve us well, but when the province announced this fund and to do this review, part of the logic is to have an outside perspective, and so it may be reviewed internally, but you know, one of the reasons we brought you in was to make sure any area where there's significant expenses, and procurement is one of them, to make sure we're not missing anything.
Yeah, so I misspoke. When I said staff is focusing on that, I believe they're focusing in on it through an independent firm working with them right now as well.
And
so
if
it's
there's
not
any
them
independent
themselves
firms that aren't part of this process, they should be brought into this process so that you could take a look at it.
Yeah, and I'll go back to Commissioner Pateri's comments earlier. That will the work, for example, on HR. They will work to make sure that we have connections with those firms so that we have access to all that documentation and information as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vicente.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Speaking to Councillor Pellechy's motion, perhaps if we could have Ms. Velci, who is our Chief Auditor, comment on what she thinks about what that role could look like.
Through the chair. So the one thing I do want to highlight is in taking on this role, that will affect our audit plan. So some of the audits that we have scheduled to complete in 2019 won't be completed. So I can take on the role and connect with the consultants if that's what's being presented here. It just means that our audit plan won't get completed as we had anticipated.
Thank you, and I think that's, if other members of council have any further questions, but I just wanted to hear what your thoughts were on initially, and as we continue to debate this, I want to listen to what other members have to say.
Okay. Well, first, Councillor Pellechy.
So I didn't have this discussion with you, and maybe I should have, but I think that I'd hate to see, our audit plan fall to anything and not be fully completed. I don't know what drops off the audit plan, so I can't say here today that I'm okay with it or I'm not okay with it because I'm not sure what that is, and I don't think anybody does. We need to sit down and have that discussion. I'm still going to move the motion, and I hope council can support it, but I think I want it stated or moved in terms of, after review of the audit plan, if determined that, and the chair, Councilor Medeiros, and I'm glad he's on the board, if we don't think that it's the right thing to do, then at that time we can not do it. But I think we need to have that consultation, and I think members of this council are comfortable having that discussion with you about what we're about to undertake and how it looks up here, because you don't report to anybody other than council. So I think that's still I still feel that this needs to be done, but I want that opportunity that maybe through audit and consultation with members, that if it's determined that our audit 2020 schedule is more important, then at that time we can make that decision. So Peter, I just gave you a whole bunch of whereases. So I want her to be the lead of the project leads, the interim between members of council and the consultants. And Councilor Medeiros has more to add, I hope.
Yeah. Councilor, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to respond really quickly. In looking at what all three consultants had presented, given the timeline, our audit committee is on November the 19th. So at this point, I can say that whatever we have done now will be presented at audit committee, and anything that we would have done from now until November the 19th could not be presented.
Couldn't be presented to audit committee.
Because it won't be done.
Councilor Medeiros?
Thank you through your mayor. Thank you, Councillor Palachi. I think the intent is very good. I think the only issue I find is the reason. So there's a couple of things. I think the reason why we're going to an external audit is to ensure that we're restoring confidence and taxpayers feel that we leave no stone unturned, and I think by inserting a city staff member, be it as independent, might take away that external perspective and independence that we're looking for. And I think it puts our internal auditor in a difficult situation because, again, these are all professionals. They deal with specific areas, and the value added of our internal auditor, as much as I really appreciate her role in our city, I'm not sure how it would benefit, the process per se. So I respectfully just ask you reconsider it, maybe hold on to it, think about it, have some conversations with our internal auditor, and bring it at a later time, respectfully. But again, I understand what your intent is. I think, again, the second thing, and not to touch upon that motion. Are we speaking to the motion, Peter? Or can I speak to
There's no motion yet.
Oh, okay. So the thing I want also, Joe, as part of the review of the efficiencies, revenue. And I know, for example, when we look at the efficiencies, are we going to be looking at revenue opportunities based on, I guess, best practices, jurisdictional, blah, 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 blah. And also color commentary about type of supports, because it's one thing you look at a municipality and all of a sudden they're getting all this money from the feds or from the province. They get all that, and that offsets a lot of, and it's very easy to find efficiencies when you're flowing with certain revenue streams that we don't have. So I think that has to be part of the conversation, and identify areas where we can get revenue, which we know is probably nil, or but I think that should be part of the conversation of where we can find some revenue streams.
Through the chair, that is absolutely correct. We are also looking at revenue opportunities. It's noted in the clerk's statement of work. I know Enforcement and Bylaw Services has some ideas that we want our consultants to look at for further revenue generation opportunities. And wherever we can, 100% we will be looking at that, okay, as well as in finance.
Thank you, Councillor Medeiros. When you say color commentary, you make value for money sound exciting. For the sake of encouraging this conversation, could I, to the clerk, put the motion that I had prepared on the screen? And I think there may be a way to bring these different perspectives together. Part of the goal in discussion with members of council was to bring some focus at the end. We're going to get lots of good ideas from different consultants, but to have a prioritization of these recommendations from our city auditor of record, who's also doing some of this work. We've spoken to them, and they believe that they have the capacity to do this, but maybe to add in what Councillor Palachi suggested without draining Farouzan's time. We could add at the end of this motion with input from Brampton's internal auditor. So just you can look where you add in with input. And that way it would be up to Farouzan to decide how much input she has the time to provide, and any insights that might be helpful in this process without distracting from her core responsibility. Understanding Councillor Palachi's wish was to utilize some of the talent we have in-house here. Okay, I don't see any additional. We had 3 names on the board, they're now gone. I think this sort of weaves it together, and we had booked this meeting from 5:30 to 7, so I'm mindful of time as well. I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Motion carries. I also need a motion to receive the reports. Moved by Councillor Dillon, seconded by Councillor Medeiros. All those in favor? Okay. We have a public question period now. Seeing no public questions. There's no other closed session items. So I think we've covered a lot of ground tonight, and everyone's had a chance to ask some questions. We'll have the follow-up meeting to this as soon as it appears like we have this follow-up information available, and I'm thankful that members of council have allowed us to start on this budgetary process much earlier this year than we have last year. On that note, do I have a motion to adjourn? Move, sorry? Yeah.
We have some 300 pages in front of us that's in closed session. Are we not going into closed session? I thought there were further consultation discussions that we wanted.
Through the chair, as the project evolves, there will be projects.
And I would note, members of council just got that yesterday, from my understanding, and so for our next meeting, I think everyone will have had more time to digest all 311 pages. And we'll have an opportunity to engage in future color commentary for the next meeting. I have a motion to adjourn from Councillor Pleshy, seconded by Councillor Bowman. All those in favor? Motion carries.